his brother in the country. He was convinced that country life was the best life. He had now come to enjoy that life at his brother's. Constantine Levine was very glad, the more so as he no longer expected his brother Nikolai that summer. But despite his love and respect for Sergei Ivanovich, Constantine Levine felt awkward in the country with his brother. It was awkward and even unpleasant for him to see his brother's attitude towards the country. For Constantine Levine, the country was the place of life, that is, of joy, suffering, labor. For Sergei Ivanovich, the country was, on the one hand, a rest from work, and on the other, an effective antidote to corruption, which he took with pleasure and an awareness of its effectiveness. For Constantine Levine, the country was good, in that it presented a field for labor that was unquestionably useful. For Sergei Ivanovich, the country was especially good because there one could and should do nothing. Besides that, Sergei Ivanovich's attitude towards the peasantry also made Levine cringe slightly. Sergei Ivanovich said that he loved and knew the peasantry, and often conversed with muzhiks, something he was good at doing, without pretense or affectation, and from each such conversation he deduced general data in favor of the peasantry, and as proof that he knew them. Constantine Levine did not like such an attitude towards the peasantry. For Constantine, the peasantry was simply the chief partner in the common labor, and despite all his respect, and a sort of blood love for the muzhiks that he had probably sucked in, as he himself said, with the milk of his peasant nurse, he, as partner with them in the common cause, while sometimes admiring the strength, meekness, and fairness of these people, very often, when the common cause demanded other qualities, became furious with them for their carelessness, slovenliness, drunkenness, and lying. If Constantine Levine had been asked whether he loved the peasantry, he would have been quite at a loss to answer. He loved and did not love the peasantry, as he did people in general. Of course, being a good man, he tended to love people more than not to love them, and therefore the peasantry as well. But it was impossible for him to love or not love the peasantry as something special, because not only did he live with them, not only were all his interests bound up with theirs, but he considered himself part of the peasantry, did not see any special qualities or shortcomings in himself or in them, and could not contrast himself to them. Besides that, though he had lived for a long time in the closest relations with the muzhiks as a master and a mediator, and above all as an adviser, the muzhiks trusted him and came from 25 miles away for his advice, he had no definite opinion of the peasantry, and would have had the same difficulty replying to the question whether he knew the peasantry as to the question whether he loved the peasantry. To say that he knew them would be the same for him as to say that he knew people. He constantly observed and came to know all sorts of people, muzhik people among them, whom he considered good and interesting people, and continually noticed new traits in them, changed his previous opinions, and formed new ones. Sergei Ivanovich did the contrary. Just as he loved and praised country life in contrast to the life he did not love, so he loved the peasantry in contrast to the class of people he did not love. And so he knew the peasantry as something in contrast to people in general. In his methodical mind, certain forms of peasant life acquired a clear shape, deduced in part from peasant life itself, but mainly from this contrast. He never changed his opinion about the peasantry or his sympathetic attitude towards them. In the disagreements that occurred between the brothers during the discussions of the peasantry, Sergei Ivanovich always defeated his brother, precisely because Sergei Ivanovich had definite notions about the peasantry, their character, properties, and tastes, whereas Constantine Levine had no definite and unchanging notions, so that in these arguments Constantine was always caught contradicting himself. For Sergei Ivanovich, his younger brother was a nice fellow with a heart well placed, as he put it in French, but with a mind which, though rather quick, was subject to momentary impressions and therefore filled with contradictions. With the condescension of an older brother, he occasionally explained the meaning of things to him, but could find no pleasure in arguing with him because he beat him too easily. Constantine Levine regarded his brother as a man of great intelligence and education, noble in the highest sense of the word, and endowed with the ability to act for the common good. But in the depths of his soul, the older he became and the more closely he got to know his brother, the more often it occurred to him that this ability to act for the common good, of which he felt himself completely deprived, was perhaps not a virtue, but on the contrary a lack of something, not a lack of good, honest and noble desires and tastes, but a lack of life force, of what is known as heart, of that yearning which makes a man choose what is lost my place. Of that yearning which makes a man choose one out of all the countless paths in life presented to him, and desire that one alone. The more he knew his brother, the more he noticed that Sergei Ivanovitch and many other workers for the common good had not been brought to this love of the common good by the heart, but had reasoned in their minds that it was good to be concerned with it, and were concerned with it only because of that. And Levine was confirmed in this surmise by observing that his brother took questions about the common good and the immortality of the soul no closer to heart than those about a game of chess or the clever construction of a new machine. Besides that, Constantine Levine also felt awkward in the country with his brother, because in the country, especially during the summer, he was constantly busy with the farming, and the long summer day was not long enough for him to do everything, while Sergei Ivanovitch rested. But though he rested now, that is, did not work on his book, he was so used to intellectual activity that he liked to utter in beautifully concise form the thoughts that occurred to him, and liked it when there was someone there to listen to him. His most usual and natural listener was his brother, and therefore, despite the friendly simplicity of the relations, Constantine felt awkward leaving him alone. Sergei Ivanovitch liked to stretch out on the grass in the sun, and lie there like that, baking and lazily chatting. "You wouldn't believe," he said to his brother, "how I love this rustic idleness. There's not a thought in my head. You could play ninepins in it." But Constantine Levine was bored sitting and listening to him, especially since he knew that, without him, they were carting dung to the fields that were not yet cross-plowed, and would heap it up in the old way if he was not watching, and they would not screw the shares to the plows, but would take them off and say that iron plows were a worthless invention, nothing like the good old wooden plow, and so on. "Enough walking about in the heat for you," Sergei Ivanovitch would say to him. "No, I'll just run over to the office for a minute," Levine would say, and dash off to the fields. If you've enjoyed this format, please leave a like and subscribe and return tomorrow for the next chapter.